My name is John Passfield, and the title of this reading will be John and Dickens, Video 27, Critical Quotations, Part 1. Here's my novella, John and Dickens, The Christmas Mystery. There's the diagram of John in Dickens' writing room, Dickens seated, surrounded by his characters. Here's the summary on the back cover. Writer John Passfield leaves his home, buys a coffee, and drives down to the shores of Lake Erie to perform a Christmas ritual, strolling along the beach at Port Maitland. It's something he's done for many years, but this year is different. This year, John suddenly finds himself in the writing room of famed Victorian novelist Charles Dickens, who sets out his new idea for a Christmas tale. Dickens invites John to watch rehearsals for the writing of the story, but as Dickens struggles through contentious negotiations with his amazingly independent characters, John wonders whether a Christmas carol will ever be written. So that's the big mystery of this novella. Will a Christmas carol in 1843 ever be written? The premise of this novella, John and Dickens, is the same premise as that of all my novels and novellas, that every word of the text of the novel or novella is an image in the mind of the main character. Now, there are 32 items of criticism of the works of Charles Dickens in this novella, arranged as 4 per chapter for 8 chapters of thought in the mind of John. So these 32 quotations are imagery in the mind of John, the main character, as he interacts with Charles Dickens, as Dickens takes John on a whirlwind tour of his preparations to write his novella, A Christmas Carol. So here are some of those quotations. Okay, these are quotations about Charles Dickens and his books, which John, who lives in the 21st century, has read. Okay, so let's go to page 17 for the first two. Number 1, Dickens used to lock himself in his study during a period of extreme concentration, which he referred to as the agonies of plotting and contriving a new book. The second quotation, Dickens said that if he were not to shut himself up obstinately and sullenly in his room for a great many days without writing a word, he didn't think that he ever should be able to make a beginning. So Dickens in his writing room, as critics have pointed out years later, years after Dickens died. Okay, let's go to page 21, spilling over into page 22, or 20, spilling over to 21. Anyway, okay, here's the first quotation. Dickens presents the nightmare of what we are and what we want in its most elemental and undifferentiated form. The second quotation, Dickens presents what might be called the honesty of the dream world. The honesty of the dream world. So these are fascinating quotations when you think about Dickens novels or any other novels, okay? And this is what critics are suggesting about these books. Here's another one, page 26. 2 more. The point of view in a Dickens novel is often hallucinated, fearful, and insecure. The reader experiences the point of view of an ill-fed child. So we can think of Oliver holding out his bowl and asking for more food. We can think of Dickens in the blacking factory as a boy. No doubt hungry various days. His family was poor. He was poor. Okay. Page 29, 2 more quotations. These are images in the mind of John as he's going through this experience with Dickens. Dickens's genius for compression, his ability to spring an entire character from a single image, results in a prose of extraordinary concentration. The second quotation, it is a prose of such suggestiveness, compact and sure of stroke, that the language itself seems an organ of perception. So Language is a mode of perception. Imagery is a mode of perception. 2937. We can understand things if we think of an image for them. I think that's what they're getting at there. That's how I would respond to that quotation. Here's another two. A Dickens novel presents a reality that has seemingly lost all coherence. Number two, an alternative grid is placed over this reality, an integrated pattern which is attempting to imagine itself into being. So you have reality over which you place a grid, and the reality is trying to become maybe the ideal that the grid suggests is possible. Okay, that was 37. Let's go to 41 for two more quotations. Quotations acting as imagery in the mind of John, influencing his response to Dickens as he experiences him. Number one, extreme color, style, and manner are at the core of Dickens's novelistic technique. Number two, his technique is closer to poetic drama than to that of a conventional novel. His technique is closer to poetic drama than it is to a conventional novel. Okay, from 41 we go to 49 for two more quotations acting as imagery. Number one, Dickens's characters are a case of humanity caught and made permanent at its highest and most extreme mood. So just the basic elements of humanity at their most extreme, I suppose it's saying. Number two, excuse me, a Dickens novel's underlying themes are stated and restated in various keys throughout the entire work. And that was 49. And 52, the last two that I'm going to read in this presentation. Here they are. Number one. In a Dickens novel, a character is confronted either with his double or with his opposite. So when a Dickens character meets another character, it's himself he's looking at, perhaps, his double. Or perhaps his, anti-self, I guess you'd say, his opposite, right? Do we see ourselves in other people? Yes, sometimes. Do we see the people we aren't and don't want to be in other people? Yes, sometimes. Number two, the character is invited to see his defects as enlarged, isolated, unmistakably his own, detached for inspection. So, looking at yourself in a funhouse mirror, maybe sometimes you see exaggerated what you're not crazy about in yourself. That's kind of what I think that quotation is getting at. A Dickens character sees other characters who are an exaggerated version of himself or herself. And then when you turn quickly and look in the funhouse mirror, do you even recognize yourself? It's an opportunity to kind of see your true self exaggerated. Okay, now, here is a book, my book, The Poetic Novel 2, okay? It's a manuscript, A Poetic Novel 2, and on the bottom there's a note to myself. I'll just read them. It needs corrections, checks. It needs, corrections in the computer, I checked that off. It needs lists at the back, lists of all my books, yes. Needs an ISBN, yes, it has that. Still to come, it needs a cover, it doesn't have one yet. It needs a PDF, so I can send it to my son, who will put the cover on, and it needs posting. So when it's finished, a few more essays, I will put it into PDF, send it to my son, Craig, and he will post it. So the Poetic Novel 2, Influences and Elements. This is the only physical copy. It's in my computer and will soon be on my website in a few months, maybe. Why am I showing it now? Because I'm going to read from it, because I've written in there about Dickens, okay? Let me get back to my note here. Here's my book, The Poetic Novel 2, which is not yet ready to be posted on my website as of November 2023 when I'm recording this video. In this book, I respond to many of the quotations which I included in the text of the novella. Excuse me. The text of the novella does not tell us what John the character is thinking as he considers these quotations. Here are the thoughts of John the writer to two of the quotations that the character John is considering. So, the two critical quotations were originally written by the critic John Bailey. And here they are. So I'm reading this from a separate sheet of paper. If I take the elastics off, the book will all fall apart, but it's what's in the book. Here's John Bailey's quotation, which I quoted in the novella. The truths of a Dickens novel cannot be appreciated from the outside. The truths of a Dickens novel cannot be appreciated from the outside. Okay, the second one, the reader must participate in a Dickens novel in order to appreciate that there is any truth at all. So the reader must participate in a Dickens novel. Okay, here is my response to that as written and printed in my book, The Poetic Novel 2. Excuse me again. This is true of our engagement with all works of art, whether novels or plays or paintings or sculptures or anything else. The writer writes for himself or herself. The writer writes out of himself or herself. The mind of the writer creates. The writer takes all of the life experience that he or she has had up until the moment of the creation of the work of art. The writer selects from among the experiences of that life the most significant experiences that he or she can imagine. The writer then arranges these images in a pattern, which is printed in ink on paper, and which we call a novel or a play. We cannot know, nor do we need to care, what is the balance of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind in the creation of an individual work of art. Ben Jonson's comment that the players mentioned that Shakespeare, quote, never blotted words. Ben Jonson wrote that. The players said that Shakespeare never blotted words in the days when you had wet ink and you had to blot it with blotting paper. Might suggest that Shakespeare went into a trance as he wrote the plays without doing much conscious thinking about them. So he never had to erase any words and put different ones in. But we have no way of knowing what he thought consciously about the plays that he was writing. There's evidence of writers who have struggled to write their works of literary art. And I suppose that the amount of rewriting that such writers do suggests that it's very difficult for them to take the novel that the subconscious creative mind wants to have written and move it to the level where the conscious creative mind can actually put the words down on paper. So all of this is interesting as speculation, but it really has nothing to do with the value of a work of literary art. The value or the lack of value is in the book as it appears on the page. But the point that I would make, in agreement with this passage as I understand it, is that a novel by Dickens, or a novel or a play or a poem by any other writer, can have no value unless the reader participates. That's the big word, reader participates in what I would call the image processing experience. That is why a great novel or a great play can remain without value for a particular reader. Perhaps we've all been forced to read a particular book which the professor and legions of critics and readers have claimed as a great novel. And even if we passed the quiz or the exam at the end of that reading experience, we might have gotten nothing from it. It's simply the fact that the imagery in which a life experience has been embodied by the writer has not interacted with the imagery of the life experience that we, the readers, have in our own minds. The novel doesn't appeal to us. It says nothing about our own life experience. We keep reading that À la recherche de temps perdu by Proust is a story of a person who comes to see himself as a writer. But really, if we take an X-ray of that story, of all 7 volumes of that novel, we can see it as a person coming to see not only the value of experience as imagery, but coming to see the value of the process whereby one can engage with experience as imagery. In the case of that novel, we have Marcel, the character, learning to read information as imagery, learning to engage imaginatively with the elements of his own life experience, learning to select from among those life experiences and to arrange them so that they become imagery. So the juxtapositions of these seemingly everyday elements cry out for thematic commentary, cry out for idea commentary, cry out for speculative commentary. If one imagines Marcel the character as a reader, and one imagines the life experience of Marcel the character as a book about someone else, perhaps a book about King Lear, then it is simply a case of a person who seems to move through life without doing much thinking about what the elements of his own life experience could yield as speculative thought, if that person were to participate in its reading. So the book about Marcel, just like a book about King Lear, sits beside his shoulder on the shelf as he sips mineral water and looks out the window and imagines his next social outing. So the book about yourself is sitting on the shelf in the room beside your shoulder, but you don't know how to read it. You don't know how to read it as imagery. He comes to realize over the course of the 7 volumes how to read the book that sits beside his shoulder, the book of his own life experience. Like the book of King Lear or any other book which is written about someone else, the book of one's own life experience requires the image-making process. One must participate, that's the big word, participate, in the selection and arrangement of the significant life experience elements as imagery in order to be able to read speculatively the book of one's own life. In this sense, that is what the novel À la Recherche du Temps Perdu is about. Yes, it is about an author on the surface of the plot, but it is in its depths about becoming a reader on the imagery of one's own life. So yes, Marcel becomes an author, but more importantly, at a deeper level, one which applies to everybody, even people who aren't going to become authors, Marcel is learning to read the information of his life as the imagery of his life. That's the point. So, does one need to be a writer in order to be able to engage imaginatively with the elements of one's own life? Does one need to read a book in order to be able to imagine the elements of life as imagery? I would say no. There are many thoughtful people who are engaged in the exact process that Shakespeare engaged in, that Dickens engaged in, that Proust engaged in, with the difference being that the non-writers are not putting the images of their subconscious minds down on paper. So, are there hundreds, thousands, perhaps millions of potentially great authors walking around? Well, I would have to say yes, there are. The problem is, if one were wishing that they would all write great plays and great novels, that their conscious creative minds are not able to access the activities of their subconscious creative minds. Either that, or their subconscious creative minds are weak in comparison to those of Shakespeare and Dickens, and are producing image patterns, personal myths, objective correlatives of a rather simplistic kind, lacking the complexity that is required to produce a great work of art. So simple thinkers don't produce great works of art. As art is the highest because the most complex level of image patterning, myth creation, so racial profiling and racist propaganda are the lowest level of image patterning, myth creation, because they are the least complex version to the point of distortion of the complexity of the life experience. So anyone reducing life to simple racist propaganda isn't going to write great art, right? It's not even accurate about life because life is so highly complex. Nevertheless, all minds create imagery and all minds process imagery, as we realize when we awake in the middle of a dream. Oh, there's my mind processing some imagery, creating, arranging, processing imagery. I caught my mind as I woke up. That is my response as John the writer, not John the character, to two of the critical quotations that appear in the text of this novella. That they take their places in the mind of the main character of the novella. If such discussions about literature, what it is, and how it relates to our everyday lives interest you, have a look at the journal of this novella, which can be found for free access on my website. So, lastly, this is the novella, John and Dickens, A Christmas Mystery. It's available on Amazon. It's available at my publisher's website, roxmillspress.com. And on my website, johnpassfield.ca, the planning notebook for this novella, in which I discuss things like what I've just been reading, though that was from a different book, the poetic novel too, and the journal, the reflective journal, which I wrote while polishing the novella, and it has similar discussions as well. And lastly, I'll just say thank you for watching this video.